Before my husband passed away, he had already transferred all the household property into our son's name and left a will saying he wanted to be buried with his mistress. My son and daughter-in-law urged me. Dad suffered his whole life. This is his only wish. Mom, just go along with him. Even the grandson I raised with my own hands said, Grandma, why are you making such a fuss? If it hadn't been for you, why would Grandpa and Grandma have missed each other? How would Grandma have ended up dead? Besides, Grandpa supported you your whole life. What's wrong with letting him have his way a little? But I had given in to him my whole life. I had compromised my whole life. In the end, when I was no longer of any use, and when I fell gravely ill, the very son I had raised drove me back to the countryside, where I died miserably without food or water. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the day he came to propose to me. On my deathbed, the old cat that had followed me for more than 10 years jumped onto the bed and nudged a little fish toward me with its nose. With difficulty, I reached out and stroked its soaking wet head, knowing in my heart how hard it must have been for it to find food in the bitter chill at the end of winter. You've worked so hard to stay with me all these years. From now on, you must live well. But before I could finish, darkness closed in. At the same time, a meow sounded by my ear, as if answering the life I had wasted. A surge of white light crashed over me. When I opened my eyes again, I saw a young Charles standing before me, saying, Emily, if you agree, I'll go to Uncle Miller's to propose. It just so happens I'm off tomorrow. I looked around in shock and realized I had been reborn to the day Charles came to propose to me. The summer of 1970, cicadas buzzing noisily in that familiar way. I couldn't tell whether this was the final afterglow before death or reality itself when, behind me, came a sharp, thin cat's cry. I turned and saw a tiny golden calico kitten, no bigger than my palm, staggering toward me. I scooped it up, and joy, like reuniting with an old friend, flooded my chest. Charles spoke again, impatience creeping into his voice. So, yes or no? Say something. Ignoring his impatience, I lifted my head and said firmly, No need, Charles. You and I aren't on the same path. We can't walk it together. He was stunned, as if it had never occurred to him that I might refuse. In my previous life, faced with his proposal, I had been overjoyed, certain I had finally waited long enough for the clouds to part and the moon to shine. I never imagined the real reason he proposed was that his childhood sweetheart, Linda, was already pregnant with his child, yet he couldn't marry her. He had to find someone to take the blame and raise their child, and I, the one who secretly loved him, was the perfect choice. Charles frowned. You're turning me down because of Linda, aren't you? I told you already, she's just my neighbor's kid sister. We came to this unfamiliar place together, so I look after her a bit more. Why do you always let your thoughts run wild? Both Charles and Linda were educated youths sent down to the countryside, assigned to our area. Charles lived in my village, Linda in the neighboring one. Both of them taught at the town school. Looking at Charles's self-assured face, I wondered how, in my past life, I had failed to see how awful he really was. Love truly is a poison. It not only blinds the eyes, it waterlogs the mind. Charles, first, I'm not refusing you because of Linda. Second, whether I overthink or not is none of your concern. In any case, up to now, our relationship has only ever been that of people from the same hometown. No? My words left Charles's face draining of color and then flushing. He stood there for a long moment before forcing out, If not because of her, then because of what? Haven't you always liked me? Didn't you want to marry me? Don't be ridiculous, Charles, I said. When did I ever say I liked you or wanted to marry you? Do you want me to go and accuse you of harassment? I added, incredulous that him opening his mouth to propose didn't mean I had to marry him. Did he think he owned me? Charles went pale. You don't like me? Then why do you give me food, make clothes and shoes for me, buy the books I want? Seeing him act as if he had me wrapped around his finger, I let out a derisive laugh. If I make clothes and shoes and bring food for your brother and save money to buy things for him too, does that mean I like your brother and want to marry him? I only helped because I felt sorry for you. No one was close to you and you were living in my house, so I gave a hand. Why are you repaying kindness with accusations? When Charles first returned to the countryside, The placement centers for educated youth in our village hadn't been finished, so he was assigned to live at my house. That had been 4 years ago. He was so flustered by my words he could barely breathe, but he still gritted his teeth and asked, "Have you heard some rumor or something?" I thought for a moment. Indeed, in that time there had been rumors. People said Charles and Ethan were always together, that on weekends they were overly intimate, even going to the county hospital. The gossip spreading through the village claimed Ethan was pregnant, and that the two had had some abortion or other. Judging by the timing, it was conceivable Ethan might actually be pregnant. Seeing no expression on my face, Charles hastily explained, "It's not what you think. Ethan's not well. She took medicine for days but didn't get better, so I took her to the hospital." I stared at the lies in his eyes and asked seriously, "So whose child is the baby she's carrying?" That question froze Charles in place. He even stepped back 2 paces in panic. Then, red-faced with anger, snapped, "What nonsense are you talking? Jealousy has its limits. I already told you there's nothing between me and her. If you spread these words outside, what happens to a girl like her? What good does ruining her reputation do for you? You're being cruel." It was almost comical. I shrugged. "You're wrong. I'm not jealous. I'm just enjoying the show. Your melon and Ethan's melon taste far better than vinegar. Besides, you moralizers aren't scared of rumors, are you? Everyone talks. Yet you keep pinning that cruel label on me. Aren't you the one ruining my reputation? If you're so unhappy, go to the work team and accuse me of spreading gossip." I guessed he wouldn't dare. Charles was out of breath from my words, but he must have understood the purpose of his visit today. He took a few deep breaths, and his tone softened. "I know you've always cared about us coming from the same place, but you and I have been together for years. Haven't you seen my heart?" I looked him up and down, weighing him. The depth of his heart, whether it was tender or hard, I wouldn't claim to know. Leave Ethan to him. If he truly cared, he wouldn't have tormented me my whole life, tricked me into helping him raise his child, cared for the grandchild, tended to his bedridden mother for 15 years, then spent 16 years unable to fend for himself, and finally told me he and Ethan couldn't share a bed in life but must be utterly faithful in death. What did he take me for? A nanny, a servant, or simply a foolish woman besotted with him, someone to be humiliated by him again and again? Charles had run out of the little patience he had left for me. His face went sullen as he pointed at me. "Emily, you're really something. I'll tell you this, if you let this chance slip today, don't you dare regret it. Just wait and see." I waved him off. "Keep that thought bottled up inside you. Whoever ends up regretting it will be the dog." It seemed I'd roused the same fighting spirit in the kitten curled against my chest. It let out a fierce little meow toward Charles. I stroked its tiny head and it purred back at me, 2 soft sounds full of trust. Its eyes were startlingly bright. I tucked the kitten into my woven pack to bring home, and as I rose, a dry cough came from behind the big tree. "Hey, that kitten belongs to me." Looking up, I saw Tom Harris, the neighbor from my past life. At first, he and my older sister had been childhood companions. When we were small, people teased that he was my brother-in-law, and he blushed and told everyone to stop. Later, his parents and 2 younger brothers died in a landslide, and whenever anyone joked about marriage between him and my sister, my parents would frown and tell people to stop. My sister later graduated and married a factory worker in town. Tom had followed his uncle into the army to learn auto repair. Around this time, perhaps because he had leave, he'd come back to help out at our company mess hall. Cradling the kitten, I asked how he could prove it was his. In my previous life, I had met the woman from next door on this very day, but Tom hadn't appeared back then. He smiled at me in a way that wasn't quite a smile and explained, "This kitten is from Aunt Lily's big cat. It was born weak, and the mother abandoned it. I nursed it for several days until it came back to life." How could it not be his? The Harrises' house had been empty for a long time and was nearly collapsing. So when he returned, he'd been staying with Aunt Lily next door. I knew the big cat at Aunt Lily's had kittens. I had wanted one, but my sister-in-law didn't like cats, so my mother wouldn't let me keep one. In my last life, when I rescued a kitten, I'd only dared hide it in the chicken coop behind the house, but my mother discovered it, and while I was out cutting pig grass, she threw the cat behind the mountain. Luckily, by then, the kitten had grown enough that survival wasn't an issue. Sometimes when I went out to cut grass or gather firewood, I'd meet the cat, and it would bring me wild berries and small fish, even 2 jungle fowl once. I'd grown attached and truly didn't want to believe it belonged to Tom. Still, I looked Tom up and down. He was a solid 6 feet tall, a striking figure in a time when a full meal was a rarity. His physique, when he trained, was even more handsome than many male models in later magazines. Fortunately, I'd already lived one life and wasn't completely bewitched by him. I snorted. Fine, prove it's Aunt Lily's kitten, not yours. If it is yours, I'll tell her you stole her kitten. Unless you agree to do me a favor. I grabbed Tom Harris and barreled toward our company mess hall. Before I went in, I pinched my own leg hard. Tears sprang to my eyes at once. Tom stood there stunned, about to ask what I intended to do, but I had already rushed to the village head. "Sir, you have to take charge for me," I called out. The distant relative of mine who had been elected village head last year usually ate at the company mess hall, so I spotted him as soon as I ran in. As I came near, several neighbor women gathered around me. "Little Emily, what's wrong?" they asked. I sobbed twice, then embellished the story of Charles proposing to me. I said I refused, and then he threatened me. I told them I only asked him one question: what was going on between him and Linda, and he immediately accused me of being cruel, trying to ruin Linda's reputation. If there was nothing between them, why would he be afraid of gossip? If he wasn't guilty, then what was he? I cried loudly and spoke even louder. The neighbors listening around me were drawn in, and some chimed in. "That's right, if he has nothing to hide, why would he be scared?" "Exactly. An upright tree fears no shadow. I think the boy was just exposed by her, that's why he lashed out." Makes sense, makes sense. I nodded along with everyone and kept crying without worrying they might laugh at me. "Before, I did have some feelings for him," I said, "but when I heard about him and Comrade Linda, I gave up any thought of marrying him. Yet he insists that just because I gave him food or made him shoes and socks, I must be trying to seduce him. Heaven and earth can testify. When he says such things, it's clear he knew my feelings. If he didn't refuse my gifts, then naturally I thought he had feelings for me too. But even so, he still clung to some unclear relationship with Comrade Linda. Of course, when I saw that, I pulled away. Isn't that what anyone would do? Yet he dares to say I tried to seduce him? That's disgusting. He's gone too far. Please, everyone, stand up for me. Since the founding of the country, teachers taught us that women can hold up half the sky, that marriage should be based on free will. My sincere confession, admitting what I had done for Charles in the past, only made some of the gossipers fall silent. Though my parents often said I was foolish in front of outsiders, I was actually the quickest worker and had helped many families in the village, so people were fond of me. When the village head's eldest grandson once slipped into a compost pit while playing by the fields, it was me who jumped in quickly to save him. Otherwise, he might not have survived. Because of that, the village head was always grateful to me and treated my family more generously. Sometimes when our work points weren't enough, he would quietly fill them in. Now, seeing me crying bitterly, his face darkened at once. Just as he was about to comfort me, we heard my parents talking cheerfully outside, sounding as if something wonderful had happened. Everyone turned their heads to see my parents and my older brother, with his wife coming in, surrounding Charles as they entered the mess hall. The moment my mother saw me, she scolded, "Emily, why are you running around? You just finished work and haven't even washed up, yet you ran straight here. Is the mess hall missing one mouthful of food for you?" I glanced at Charles. His face was all gentle and harmless, but his eyes held both resentment and smugness, as if to say, "Even if you refuse me, so what? Can you fight against your own parents?" I gave him a cold laugh, then pretended to be frightened and hid behind the village head. "Sir, please help me. Charles must have already persuaded my parents, but I truly don't want to marry this scum." I knew Charles too well. He always thought himself noble, but he didn't get along with people in the village. He wanted to find someone suitable to take responsibility in his place, and that wasn't easy. Linda couldn't wait any longer. so it was very likely he would start with my parents. And since my parents had always liked him, if he proposed with their pressure behind it, it would be hard for me to turn the situation around. That was why I came here to the mess hall to make a scene. This was my way of pulling the firewood from under the pot, to force him to give up all thought of marrying me, and also to warn the other girls. Don't let him fool you. The village head gave me a reassuring look, then walked over to speak with my parents, the Johnsons. Seeing the two couples so pleased, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson asked, "Is there some good news?" Hearing that, my parents immediately brightened. My father even looked a bit proud and said, "Just now Charles came to propose to Emily. They've been together for years. It's a joyful matter." My mother added, "Only I didn't expect our girl to be gone half the day, and keep Charles waiting at home so long." After she spoke, she shot me a displeased glance. What surprised my mother was that after they announced Charles's proposal, there were no congratulations at all, only scoffs. Aunt Lily rolled her eyes and whispered mockingly to the woman beside her, "A rotten cucumber, and you'd be so happy about that. How shallow." Aunt Lily had a very good relationship with Tom Harris's parents, so when they passed away, my parents banned contact with Tom and told everyone not to tease about marriages between my sister and Tom or between me and Tom. That had annoyed Aunt Lily terribly. Now people laughed along, some found the scene entertaining, others openly showed disgust toward my mother, which made her so angry her eyebrows shot up. "A dog's mouth won't spit out an ivory tusk," I muttered. "If you can't eat the grapes, you call them sour. You're just jealous of my Emily." No sooner had those words left my mouth than Aunt Lily cried, "Oh please, jealous of her? Of that kind of fellow? Even if he's from the city, have you seen what he does? Fooling Emily every day and sneaking around with that Linda over there? He thinks because they're in town we wouldn't know. Shameful." She stared at Charles and went on to needle my mother. "Only your blind family would think you'd struck gold and rushed to marry off your daughter. How foolish." At that, my brother Daniel stepped forward and told Aunt Lily, "Don't talk nonsense. Charles already explained. There's nothing between him and Linda. He only treats her like a little sister and takes care of her a bit. His heart has always favored Emily. There's no filthy business like you say." Daniel had met Linda and, perhaps because she looked fragile and pretty, his protective instincts were stirred. He wouldn't stand for anyone speaking ill of her. Then Grace, the village head's daughter-in-law, came over and teased Daniel. "So everything he says is true? If he's so innocent, why be afraid of people saying he has an affair? An honest tree fears no shadow." Someone else chimed in, "That's right," and added that Emily was being cruel and trying to ruin Linda's reputation. A neighbor pointed at my brother and scolded, "You make shoes and clothes for him and treat him like an elder brother. He brags everywhere that Emily has feelings for him and won't marry anyone else. Emily doesn't want to marry him, and he dares threaten other people's daughters. I say he's the one truly ruining other people's reputations. If you beat him to death, that's what a brother should do. But you don't protect your own and instead run around sucking up to strangers. What a disgrace." My parents and Daniel heard the back and forth, and all of their faces went ugly. None of them knew what had really happened. All eyes turned to Charles at once, waiting for him to explain. Surrounded by people, his face flushed red and then went pale. After a moment he gritted his teeth and challenged me. "If there's something wrong, why didn't you go home and say it? Why make a scene out here for everyone to see?" I told him I'd already explained the matter with Linda, so why was he still being so stubborn? "She's just a girl," he insisted. "Saying things like that? You're ruining her reputation." He also accused me of threatening him, asking when I had made that claim. Did he plan to keep arguing with me? Was I supposed to be afraid of him? With reddened eyes, I stubbornly pointed toward Tom Harris not far off and said, "If you don't believe me, ask Tom whether he heard it." The village head looked surprised when Tom's name was called. Tom, embarrassed, rubbed his nose and answered, "When I went looking for the kitten, I overheard Comrade Charles proposing to Comrade Emily. He was embarrassed and didn't want to cause trouble, so he didn't speak out, but the meaning was clear. He was standing there and heard the entire event. Charles confessed his feelings to Emily and was rejected." Tom had come with his uncle, and I'd heard had earned some merit. A respected leader liked him, and everyone in the village held him in high regard and didn't dare say much against him. People asked Tom whether Charles had said I gave him gifts, meaning did that imply I had feelings for him? After they asked, I looked at Tom and asked him to answer. Tom didn't speak but nodded. I asked again whether Tom had heard Charles say I ruined Linda's reputation. Was that what Charles claimed? And Tom nodded once more, though I could see the awkwardness in his eyes. Perhaps he felt I was exaggerating or making mountains out of molehills. I couldn't keep staring at him, so I asked whether Charles had threatened me, telling me to wait and see. Again, Tom reluctantly nodded. Even if some people didn't believe me, they couldn't easily dismiss Tom. He had very good connections in our unit and was well known everywhere. But precisely because Tom had good standing, Charles disliked him from the first meeting. I looked at Charles and said, "You accuse me of ruining her reputation because of your improper behavior. If I had doubts, you say I'm ruining her reputation. If I gave you things out of kindness, you claim I did it to marry you. Doesn't that ruin my reputation too? I don't want to marry you, yet you went to my parents to pressure me. You tell me to wait and see. Wait for what? Do you plan to drag my parents out to crush me? You're the truly cruel one." Charles turned ashen. "If you had no feelings for me, why did you help me make up work points? Why secretly give my mother meat coupons and ration tickets?" I said I'd cried, and that was why I'd accused him of incompetence, and then he stood before me, wringing his hands and telling a long story about his mother's severe illness and how he couldn't repay his filial duty. I felt sorry for him, especially seeing a mother with no one to lean on, but I'd sent ration and meat coupons to my aunt for the right reasons, hadn't I? Charles was 2 years older than me. At 16, he had come to our house. At that time, my eldest sister and my second brother were both in high school, and the youngest was in middle school. Only I hadn't finished primary school, and my parents said I was too stupid to learn. No matter how much I resisted or how much I caused trouble, in the end, they kept me at home to work. Charles's parents were educated people, and he carried himself like a scholar. He wasn't like my eldest sister or my second brother who rejected me, nor like the youngest who would laugh at my foolishness. He patiently explained schoolbook lessons to me, teaching me to write and do arithmetic, praising me for being smart. Liking him was the most natural thing in the world, but no matter how much I loved him, after a life of being tormented, there was nothing left. I cried without stopping. The village head and the neighbor women hurried over to comfort me. "Emily, why are you crying? You're a good girl. There's no reason for good people to be scolded like this. If everyone's like this, who would dare do good deeds in the future?" Aunt Lily angrily agreed. "That's right. Emily did the right thing. A big man who can't shoulder a burden and makes you cover his work points. What kind of man is that?" When Charles first arrived, many times he couldn't finish his share of work in a day, and I helped him for a while. This was something everyone knew. Later, when the town built a school and needed teachers, I recommended him to the village head so he could leave farm work and go teach in town. Linda was sent to the countryside a year later than him, because her health was poor and she couldn't do farm work, so he recommended her to be a teacher in the town school. Charles probably didn't expect that if I refused to marry him, I would still make such a fuss, acting as if I wanted to cut him off completely. He thought for a moment and then forced a bitter laugh. "But Emily, it's because you treated me sincerely that I—" He looked at me with an expression of helplessness. "I truly want to marry you. Didn't we already talk about this? Later, when we go to the city, I'll take you to Tiananmen and to see the Forbidden City, to see the paradise they say is our fate. Have you forgotten? In my previous life, I really married him happily, thinking that when he returned to the city, he would take me to those places I'd yearned for. But after we did go to the city, his mother fell ill. Before that, Linda was taken abroad by her family, and her child, since it was still registered under my and Charles's names, was left with me. Unexpectedly, she died in an earthquake, and that child had to stay with me. So as soon as I arrived in the city, Before I could get used to my surroundings, I had to take on the duty of caring for Charles's mother and managing his household affairs, as well as raising his foster child, Michael Chu. Charles's mother lay bedridden, and I cared for her for 15 years until she passed away, right when Michael was in high school, and Charles's career was advancing, and he was being considered for promotion. Just when I thought I might have a little rest after 7 or 8 more busy years, Michael got married and had children, and I helped look after the grandchildren. Then Charles became disabled in a car accident, and for the last 6 years he was paralyzed, and I had to care for him every day until he died. I had been trapped in the teacher's compound, half my life without rest. I snorted. When I was young, I used to say I would marry no one but Tom Harris. So did that mean I would have to become his wife? You foolish girl, what nonsense are you talking? My mother snapped and slapped my head. You're not marrying little Charles. Why are you always trailing after him, giving him all your food and things? Are you stuffed to the brim? We told you to know your limits, but you keep acting wild. Now you complain when someone proposes. What do you actually want? I smiled and said I was just being warm, hospitable, generous to the young man staying in our house. I wanted him to feel at home. Is that wrong? I asked. Mother was so furious she reached to grab me, and I hurriedly slipped behind the aunts and uncles gathered there. She chased after me, scolding, "Don't you even look at yourself. No education, no beauty, dull-witted and a little short. If anyone would marry you, it's because you've accumulated good deeds for 8 generations, and you still refuse. You really are an ungrateful child. You'd only be satisfied if I married you off to some old leftover bachelor?" My mother fancied herself sharp-tongued, but kind-hearted, yet all that kindness went to my sister and my younger sibling. With me, if I displeased her, she seemed to wish she could swallow me whole. Even after living half a lifetime in my previous life, I still didn't understand. I thought she treated all her children fairly, but later when my youngest, May, had her marriage arranged, the bride's family asked for 3 big items and 600 yuan in betrothal money. 600 yuan in the early 1980s wasn't a small sum, plus the other items, and since my parents couldn't raise it, they came to me to help think of a way. At that time, I had just had a miscarriage and returned to my parents' home with the money Charles had given me because I felt guilty, thinking I could cry my fill in my parents' arms and tell them of the humiliations I'd borne all those years. But unexpectedly, I heard my mother sigh. If only we'd kept Emily a few more years. She's so capable. Back when our second son married, if he hadn't gone behind the hill to dig up fat sweet potatoes for half a month, we wouldn't have saved up enough ration tickets. My brother snapped. I dug with him too. How did it end up that only he dug it out? My father scolded how I worked. Didn't we all know how things were? My brother, realizing he'd been slippery, muttered and fell silent. Then my sister sighed, saying if later she married well and could settle in the capital, then I could have stayed home. My mother barked. Wasn't it you who always begged to go study, made a fuss until you nearly died to go? What did your father and I do for you? That year, when Charles came to propose, my mother thought that if I hadn't married yet, she would certainly have given me to him. Emily, after all, was a little less than perfect and might not hold on to Charles. My younger sister snorted. If it hadn't been for teacher Linda falling ill and Emily brazenly stealing his love, how could my brother have married? And before, when my sister went to the capital with my brother-in-law, you would have demanded more from her. So you wouldn't have to worry now, wouldn't you? Aren't you proud? If my sister-in-law hadn't intervened, you might have had to pay even more. But she didn't consider that when she was little and our parents were busy, who fed and bathed her, taught her to speak, taught her to sew clothes and shoes and brought her to school. She probably forgot. The first thing she said as a child was, "Big sister." Still, she's ungrateful and can't be raised. Arguments went nowhere, and after dinner in the mess hall, Tom Harris walked me home. Near the house I stopped. The kitten in my pack mewed twice in a puzzled way. I ground a pebble under my toe and lowered my head, too shy to look Tom in the eye. I used you as a shield today, I thought. I'm out of options. Charles is shameless. Since we were childhood friends, will you forgive me? For a long time, I got no reply. I snuck a glance at him, and under the moonlight, I saw Tom give me an unreadable look. After a while, he finally spoke. "I thought you'd forgotten following me around and calling me brother-in-law. Now you act like we were childhood playmates. Are these two things related?" He sounded as if he was reproaching me for trailing after him and calling him brother-in-law, making him blush without remorse. Tom had been very handsome as a boy, and his face flushing like that, he had always been the kind of boy people adored. Back then, when adults teased that he and my eldest sister made a pair, I argued for a long time that I wanted to marry him instead. But the adults told me to call him brother-in-law. I didn't understand. Every time I called him that, his face flushed, and the redder he turned, the more eager I became. I never imagined he would hold on to that memory. Very well, since I had always known when to advance and when to retreat, I bowed deeply to him on behalf of my foolish younger self, apologizing for my childish teasing. But before I could straighten up, Tom Harris grabbed the back of my collar and pulled me upright. "Is this your way of shirking responsibility?" he asked. I stared at him, stunned, unable to understand what he meant. Looking at his face, unreadable to me, I racked my brain trying to guess what he was thinking. Then, unexpectedly, he leaned closer, his voice low and heavy. "Today, I helped you play a false witness. If the truth comes out one day, this stain will follow me for life. It could damage my future. Have you thought about how you'll make it up to me?" If not for the sight of his ears burning red, I might have been fooled by him. I was nearly speechless, about to decide whether to expose him right then, when I heard him say, "You think one little apology can erase everything from today? What about the girl who once said she would never marry anyone but me?" This time, my own face turned hot. The kitten in my arms seemed to sense my nervousness and squirmed. I hurried to stroke it smooth, while thinking to myself that marrying Tom Harris didn't seem impossible after all. So I asked him softly, "If marrying me would harm your future, would you still want me?" Tom blinked, his cheeks reddening even more, and quickly replied, "Marry me. You don't need to worry about anything else." I thought to myself, if one day he regretted it, I could always live independently, take care of myself. At least for now, following him was the only way I could leave this place more smoothly. "Then go ahead and submit the request to your unit first," I told him. I never expected Tom Harris to act so quickly. Within a single day, he had prepared the entire betrothal ceremony and came to propose, bringing along the village head and the party secretary as matchmakers. When such a formidable group arrived at my house, my whole family was stunned. My sister-in-law, Grace Chu, glanced at the crowd approaching and sneered, "Emily, you really are something. Yesterday it was an educated youth, today it's your childhood sweetheart. You must think you're worth a fortune." Tom answered calmly, "A good girl in the village is worth vying for." 2 years earlier, when I hadn't even turned 18, Grace had already said she wanted me married off, afraid I'd drain the family's resources. But at that time my older sister had just given birth, didn't get along with her mother-in-law, and asked my mother to help her. Our family lacked labor, our work points weren't enough, and we nearly didn't make it through the new year, so the plan to marry me off was postponed. Later, when Grace saw how quick and capable I was, often picking up the work she couldn't finish, she treated me a little better. Now, faced with Tom's straightforward defense, she couldn't take it and, not daring to argue with him, turned instead to me with a snort. "Not even married yet, and already you're protecting him. Quite the schemer, aren't you, little sister-in-law?" I grinned. "That's nothing compared to you, sister-in-law. All the educated youths in your team were under your protection, weren't they?" Before Grace married into my family, she'd already had some questionable ties. The young educated men in her old team didn't speak well of Grace, but that hadn't stopped my second brother from insisting on marrying her. No one expected that I would bluntly expose her misdeeds, and instead of her, it was my brother who reacted first. "Emily, are you out of your mind?" he snapped, reaching as if to grab me, but Tom Harris stepped in and blocked him. "So it's fine for you all to whisper and slander, but she can't speak the truth?" My brother David flushed red, his face tight with frustration. At that moment, the village head stepped forward to smooth things over. "What's all this ruckus? If something important's come up, Can't you sit down and talk it through? Finally, he turned to my mother. Wife of old Six, keep your daughter-in-law in line. Her belly's already big, she should be at home resting, not running around. With so many people here, a bump could cause trouble. The village head was clearly favoring Tom Harris. My parents and Grace heard it too, and had no choice but to grit their teeth, while my brother led his wife into the house. A moment later, we all heard Grace inside, cursing and sobbing loudly. It was quite a commotion. One of the neighbor women leaned close to me and gave me a thumbs up. Should have told her off years ago. You've just been too kind, holding back all this time. Everyone knew Grace disliked me, and now that she was 4 months pregnant, she acted even more overbearing. Every day when I came home from work, she bossed me around like a spinning top. But this time, even if my mother was displeased, nothing could stop the village head and the party secretary from following Tom into the house to discuss the marriage between me and him. Later I asked Tom, "How did you manage to invite both the village head and the party secretary? Don't tell me you've sworn brotherhood with the village head." I gave him a thumbs up. With their support, my parents quickly agreed to the marriage. The only issue was the high bride price they demanded, but Tom didn't even blink before agreeing to it all. Because of that, after our wedding we went through a period of real poverty, but it didn't matter. We had our hands and our strength, and life would surely get better. Once the marriage was settled, Tom hurried to repair his old house. He said that when he returned to his unit, if I ever felt unhappy at home, I could stay at his place instead. These days he was hauling bricks from a kiln in the next village and laying them himself. At first, he said, people used rice water mixed with mud and straw to plaster walls, but it wasn't sturdy over time. He insisted on building with brick. I brought him a bowl of salted sugar water. Seeing his hands caked with mud, I stood on tiptoe and fed him the drink. His face flushed as he took 2 gulps. Before I return to my unit, our marriage application will surely be approved. When that happens, if you don't want to stay at your parents', just come here. Being cared for and respected. It feels good, doesn't it? I stayed to help him for a while before heading home. Tom walked me all the way back, lingering until I promised to go fishing with him tomorrow to catch food for the kitten. Only then did he leave, reluctant to go. But no sooner had he turned the corner than Charles appeared behind me, face dark. "Do you really want to marry him that much?" I instinctively stepped half a pace back, putting distance between us. "What's wrong with you? Standing here at night like some ghost?" He was clearly furious at me, but tried to look soulful and wounded. "Emily, can't you give me another chance? I'm sincere about you." His performance was so exaggerated I couldn't help but cast him a sideways glance. "Charles, you really are shameless. I've heard everything already." "Linda is already carrying your child," I said coldly. "Aren't you going to give her a proper place in your life?" My younger brother, Kevin, who was infatuated with Linda, had always hoped that she and Charles, 2 people who seemed meant for each other, would eventually end up together. So wasn't it only right that I give them a little push? And sure enough, Kevin didn't disappoint. He brought along a few classmates, and on the very day Linda took leave from work, they exposed her pregnancy. It was said that Linda neither denied it nor named the father. But anyone with eyes could tell it was tied to Charles, even if he refused to admit it. So I had someone stir Linda's emotions, making her believe Charles only wanted to use her without taking responsibility, that in the end she'd be left with nothing. Just as expected, she grew anxious, and the rumor that she was carrying Charles's child spread like wildfire across villages and brigades. Charles was clearly panicked. "It's not what you think. Linda and I have nothing between us." He reached out to grab me, but I dodged quickly and shouted into the house, "Kevin, Charles just admitted that Linda isn't carrying his child. Come out and hear this yourself." In the past, whenever Charles and I quarreled, he would leave our village's youth camp. But today, it seemed Linda had pushed him into a corner, so he came running back, trying to trap me instead. A dog can't stop itself from eating filth. Charles's father had been an intellectual. Years earlier, he was ruined in a political struggle and lost his life. To prove his own purity, Charles abandoned his ailing mother and came to the countryside to join the production team. Linda, meanwhile, was his childhood neighbor. But she was half Japanese. Her mother, a Japanese woman, had done some secretive work, and after giving birth to Linda, returned to Japan. Linda's identity was sensitive and complicated. Though she and Charles had grown up together and under normal circumstances could have married, in those times it was impossible. For Charles to return to the city smoothly, he needed no blemish on his record. Marrying a village girl like me would show he had taken root in the countryside, which could even score him extra points. But marrying a woman of Japanese descent, with such a complex background, let alone the question of returning to the city, would create serious obstacles for his career and his future. Charles knew this perfectly well, whether in my past life or in this one. My shouting not only brought Kevin out, eager to defend Linda, but also drew plenty of curious neighbors. Kevin saw Charles trying to grab me and lashed out with a fierce kick. "Linda is carrying your child, and you're still out here chasing other women? Do you think you deserve her?" Charles was struck hard before he could explain, and then Kevin followed with a flurry of punches, beating him until he was crawling on the ground, chased 2 miles away. After that, Charles never dared come looking for me again. Before Tom Harris returned to his unit, we had already registered our marriage. The day I received the certificate, I moved into his home. At first, my parents wanted to keep me, but my mind was made up. Their anger burned so hot, they refused to give me the dowry they'd promised. They thought I'd cave in, but honestly, 2 cotton quilts and a porcelain wash basin, whether I had them or not, made little difference to me. Still, I couldn't help but feel chilled at heart. Thankfully, even if Tom didn't have much money, he had already prepared all the essential items for daily life, so I lacked for nothing. Instead, he sat by the bed, embarrassed, and said, "The house is still a bit shabby. Please bear with it. From now on, I'll send all my pay home, and you can slowly buy the things you like." I glanced at him sidelong, perhaps too openly. His face gradually flushed red, and when he spoke, he even stammered a little. Sure enough, his blushing was just as endearing as before. I couldn't help but laugh softly. All those material things, no matter how much people crave them, they don't really matter. "Then what do you like?" he asked. I reached out, lifted his chin, and looked straight into his startled eyes. Word by word, I said, "Of course I like children, especially ones like you. The way you blush makes me so happy." That one sentence was like a switch, unleashing the beast hidden inside Tom Harris. That night, I was nearly devoured by him, left with not a scrap of bone. Thankfully, newlyweds in the unit were given a few days' leave, so I didn't have to suffer sore back and aching knees while still working in the fields. The 2 of us, carefree and happy, spent those days together until Tom's leave ended and he returned to his unit. I reluctantly saw him off, and when I turned back, I heard that Charles had brought Linda to the unit to file their marriage report. It should have had nothing to do with me, but Charles deliberately came looking for trouble. "Emily, we shouldn't be like this. I even dreamed of you. We were in bed together," he said, face full of false longing. Seeing his expression, I forced back my disgust and cut him off. "If you're not awake yet, then crawl back to bed. Talking nonsense about dreams, what a sickness. You should let Dr. Who give you 2 injections to settle you down." Dr. Who was only the village veterinarian, best at treating poultry and livestock. My mockery made Charles's face go from green to red, but his fake, tender gaze didn't waver. He still looked at me like I was supposed to be an irresistible dish set before him. "Emily, how did you become like this? You clearly have feelings for me. Why did you suddenly change? Wasn't I good enough? Tell me and I'll change, all right? Please don't treat me this way," he begged, moving toward me as if to grab me. A dark impulse rose in me. I swung the hoe down on his leg. He screamed in agony and collapsed to the ground. I shouted loudly for help, crying that I was being harassed. When people rushed over and asked what had happened, I added fuel to the fire, repeating Charles's disgusting words, painting him as a shameless scoundrel. People looked down on him with contempt and dragged him straight to the unit office. I firmly insisted he had harassed me and demanded he be punished as a molester. With a record already against him, Charles's excuses were useless. But since I had crippled his leg, the village head ordered both sides to back down and end the matter there. I naturally listened to the village head. Charles ground his teeth in fury, but had no choice but to swallow his anger. After that, I never saw him again. Later, I heard that after Linda married him, she became pregnant. Because of her poor health, she was granted leave to return to the city. 2 months later, I myself began to feel odd. I wanted to sleep all the time. Once, I even dozed off while drinking water near the haystack, frightening my teammates into thinking something had happened to me. Finally, a neighbor woman quietly asked me, "Emily, have you had your period in the past 2 months?" I froze, then realized what she meant, my heart pounding wildly. Seeing my reaction, she knew I understood. She pulled me aside, and I whispered, "So, does that mean I'm pregnant?" I instinctively placed a hand on my stomach. Memories of my past life came rushing back. I had once been pregnant too, but that child never had the chance to see this world. It was killed by Charles. In that life, I had been married to Charles for years without conceiving. I always thought the problem was mine, and swallowed countless medicines, though he always told me not to pressure myself. Even without a child of my own, I once told myself it was fine. I had raised Jacob for so many years. Though he wasn't my flesh and blood, he was closer to me than a real son. I believed he would take care of us in our old age, and that gave me some comfort. It wasn't until I turned 30 and finally became pregnant that Charles turned on me viciously. He accused me of cheating, of being shameless, and demanded a divorce. That was when I discovered the truth. He had secretly undergone a vasectomy long ago, just so he could reserve his role as a father solely for Linda's child. The moment I learned he had done that, it was like being struck by lightning. No matter how I explained, insisting the baby was his, he refused to listen and forced me to have an abortion. The baby was already over 5 months along, a little girl. That time, I cried until I was nearly blind. Later, Charles found a medical professor to conduct a paternity test. He originally wanted to use the results to nail me to a pillar of shame, but fate betrayed him. The test confirmed the child had been his all along. Only then did I realize that even after a vasectomy, men weren't necessarily completely sterile. Afterward, Charles admitted his mistake and gave me a large sum of money as compensation. I had planned to take the money and finally divorce him. But Jacob, who was already in his teens, clung to me every day, coaxing me, begging me not to leave. Charles even knelt before me, claiming he had been possessed by demons, that he wasn't himself, begging for forgiveness. He said I was already older, without a career, and asked how I could possibly survive in a big city on my own. I wavered, softened by Jacob's pleading, daunted by the harsh reality Charles described, and held back by the hope I still had for Jacob. So I stayed. But in this life, I swore I would stay far away from that plague of a man. I never expected to conceive so soon with Tom. It felt too good to be true. My heart swelled with indescribable emotion, like a gentle tide wrapping around me. I longed to share the news with him. In my past life, he had never had children either, though he later adopted 2, raising them with exceptional care. He even sponsored many poor students. Clearly, he loved children deeply. Sure enough, when I told him, his stammering words betrayed the same emotions that filled me. But beyond the joy, shyness, and relief, I could also sense a heavy guilt within him. After that, Aunt Lee moved into our home, saying Tom had asked her to help take care of me. But sadly, Bailey, my dear cat, stopped eating or drinking for 2 days and passed away. During those 2 days, my heart thumped wildly, my stomach cramped, and I felt as if something ominous was looming. The day Bailey died, I dreamed of my cat from my past life. In that dream, I couldn't tell if it was the past or the present, but seeing it filled me with such joy. I was so happy that even when it opened its mouth to speak, it felt perfectly natural. It told me, it was Bailey, that the life of a cat was too short, and in the last life it had gone through several bodies, yet always managed to find me. It said it had always wanted to be my child, but never found the right opportunity, so it could only accompany me as a kitten. Then it clenched its tiny pink and white paws into little fists and cried, "I'm not satisfied. Why can't I be Mommy's precious baby? I'm not satisfied." I hurried to soothe it, stroking its fur. "Be good, don't be angry. Getting angry will only hurt you and it's not worth it." It nuzzled against my palm, its little face so adorable, but I could see the smugness in its eyes. "That's why," it said, I used my chance at reincarnation to return to the past with you. Now it seems my decision was absolutely right. Only then did I understand. My rebirth hadn't been random at all. It was a gift, granted to me by my Bailey. After saying that, it rubbed its face against mine again. Though I can't bear to leave Mommy, this kitten has to go now. In a panic, I asked, "Where are you going? You'll still be my child, won't you?" It looked at me deeply, its shining eyes filled with both longing and a faint smile. But in the end, it gave me no answer at all, only slipped into my belly. When I woke, I was dazed for a long time. The pounding of my heart and the cramping in my stomach, which had lingered for days, suddenly vanished. 8 months later, I gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. Sadly, the little girl was born without breath. Everyone told me not to cry since I was still in confinement, but I couldn't hold back my tears. I thought of my Bailey, who had given me a second life, and then used the last of its strength to protect me. Even now, I wondered what kind of virtue I could possibly have to deserve such devotion. But deep inside, I firmly believed we would meet again. On the 5th day after I gave birth, Tom Harris hurried back in a rush. He had a wound on his body, so his unit gave him more than 2 months' leave. He told me the injury was nothing serious, that I was what mattered most. Just as he said, he cared for me wholeheartedly during those 2 months. But soon after my recovery, I heard news that Charles had been taken away by the Central Security Unit, apparently for leaking state research secrets. No one knew the details, but to me it was clear as day. In my past life, shortly before my death, I had met Jacob once more. He had looked at me with disgust and smugness. "You really are a pitiful, brainless fool. Whatever Charles said, you believed it all." Pathetic. But the biggest fool was Charles himself. "I thought I'd have to wait until you died before I could take everything from the two of you, but who would have guessed he'd outdo you, leaving me everything instead? Did he really think I was his son?" Jacob had laughed like a madman. It was only then that I learned his real father had been a Japanese man. Now he had sold off all of Charles's property and was preparing to emigrate to Japan to reclaim his bloodline. Over the years, he had stolen countless documents from within the country and sent them abroad. The only pity for him was that his mother, Linda, had never managed to obtain the core research of Charles's father, Dr. Robert Chu. Otherwise, they would have reunited long ago and wouldn't have needed to live among inferior people like us. For so many years, Dr. Robert Chu, Charles's father, had been a brilliant researcher. And only then did I also learn the truth. Linda, though born and raised in this country, had long since been bought and turned into a foreign spy. Her closeness to Charles was never out of love. It was simply to reach the research achievements of his father. That was why, in this life, as soon as I met Tom Harris, I told him of my suspicion that Linda was a spy. He never asked why I suspected her, only looked for a way to pass the information to the right authorities. Because of this, Linda was placed under surveillance even before she returned to the city. A month ago, she abandoned her 2-month-old baby and tried to flee abroad, but before she even boarded the plane, she was caught red-handed. Charles, in turn, was dragged down with her. He had once been so close to returning to the city to take over his father's position, but this scandal destroyed him completely. Because of his wife's issues, in this life he would never again be trusted with key personnel or sensitive work. As for what became of him afterward, I couldn't be bothered to care. I had my own busy life to lead. Who had time to waste on him? When my child turned 2 years old, Tom received a spot to go abroad with the army. I immediately took my child with me to follow Tom, and at the same time found a job with their performing troupe. From time to time, I could even appear on stage as a guest performer. It was quite fun. At the end of that year, Linda was sentenced, and she wouldn't be out for at least 15 years. As for Charles, left alone at home with Jacob, he seemed to lose his mind. One morning, as if possessed, he shoved Jacob into a large water vat by the door. Only after the boy drowned did he snap out of it, screaming like a madman, cursing Linda for betraying him, cursing Jacob for being ungrateful, cursing himself for being a fool. Finally, like someone completely deranged, he stumbled into the street, asking everyone he saw if they had seen me, saying he wanted to find Emily. He was arrested for intentional murder and sentenced to death. Before his execution, he begged everywhere for one last chance to meet me. After some hesitation, I finally went. The moment he saw me, he jumped up in excitement. "Emily, all of this is just a dream." "It's all a dream, isn't it?" He looked at me with eyes I couldn't describe, then quickly continued, "I dreamed such a complete dream. It was like living a whole lifetime. In that dream, you and I were husband and wife. We depended on each other for our entire lives. You forgave me, loved me, cared for me. Emily, I regret it all. Can you save me? Your husband now is powerful. Maybe he—" I cut him off with a cold laugh. "Living our whole lives together? Don't make such words filthy. You know very well what kind of man you are. And besides, what my husband can do has nothing to do with you." Charles had always been selfish. In my past life, he didn't marry Linda at first because he worried her background would harm his future. Later, when she went abroad, he began to think marrying her might bring him great fortune. From then on, he looked down on me even more, yet still refused to give up his free housekeeper, me. Now he said he regretted it, but that was nothing more than fear and calculation, not true remorse. Did he really take me for such a fool? "I have nothing more to say to you," I told him flatly. "I came only to see with my own eyes how you'd end up, knowing you won't die peacefully. That's enough for me. Now you can go to your grave in peace." Without a backward glance, I turned and walked away, ignoring his desperate screams and mad pleas. Outside, the sunlight was golden and brilliant. Tom was waiting with our son. I reached down to touch my belly, where another life, 3 months along, was growing. As the two of them walked toward me, I smiled, stretching out my hands to hold on to theirs, one big and one small. My heart felt as though it was soaking in warm sunlight. This was what life truly meant. Tom's side story. Emily was like a little monkey since childhood, always full of energy, climbing trees for bird nests, diving into rivers to catch fish and shrimp. She was braver than any boy. She loved cats, and so did I. When we were 5 years old, she somehow found a litter of kittens and caught 2. She gave me one and secretly kept the other for herself. But her family didn't allow pets, so in the end she gave me both. Still, she came every day to visit them, bringing fish or catching mice for them, caring for the kittens like they were her little brothers. But that was during a famine. People barely had enough to eat themselves, let alone feed cats. The kittens grew so thin, they were just skin and bones. One day, they ran out and never came back. Emily and I went searching and discovered some boys from the neighboring village roasting something under a small grove. When we got closer, we saw 2 bloody kitten skins hanging from a tree. Emily exploded with rage and rushed forward, ready to fight those boys who were much bigger than her. Afraid she'd get hurt, I charged in to help. But they were older and stronger than we were. Even though Emily and I managed to land a few blows, in the end we were beaten badly by those older boys. Afterward, we buried the kittens in that small grove. Watching Emily sob uncontrollably, her whole body covered in bruises, was the first time I truly felt the weakness of my own strength. I thought, if only I were stronger. Could I have protected her and our kittens? From then on, I wanted nothing more than to protect her. After that, I couldn't stop myself from seeking her out often. But to my surprise, everyone thought I was going to see her older sister. Emily even teased me, saying she'd call me brother-in-law. I snapped at her not to say such nonsense, but she just laughed and said, "I looked handsome when I blushed," then kept chasing after me, calling me that over and over. It went on like that until tragedy struck my family. Her uncle and aunt forbade their children from having anything to do with me. Only then did Emily stop calling me brother-in-law, though she would still secretly slip me a steamed cornbread bun or sometimes a chicken egg. Days like that stretched on until, finally, her uncle discovered she'd stolen an egg for me. That time, she nearly got beaten to death, and once again I was struck by how powerless I was. To keep her from being dragged down because of me, I had no choice but to avoid her. Later, when a group of educated youths came to our brigade, Emily was paired with a young man a little younger than me. She followed him around closely, even recommending him for a teaching position in town. People teased her, saying she was just finding herself a sweetheart. She didn't get angry. By then, she and I had already gone a long time without sitting down to talk. Then one year, recruiters came to our village to enlist soldiers. I signed up. Before I left, I went to look for Emily, but she wasn't home. I ran into her sister, who told me not to think too much, that Emily was about to marry and move to town to work in a factory. She also told me not to be a toad lusting after swan meat. I was speechless. In the end, I left without seeing Emily one last time. Years later, when I returned to the brigade, rumors were everywhere that Emily and that educated youth had become a couple. I secretly went to see her a few times. She really did seem attentive toward him. At first, I wanted to find her and have a serious talk, but I was still one step too late. Even so, I couldn't bring myself to give up. That day, I brought a kitten to her, hoping to try just a little harder. Instead, I ended up overhearing Charles proposing to her. For a moment, it felt like my heart had stopped. But then, I heard Emily reject him outright. I thought my ears were playing tricks on me. To my amazement, she didn't just refuse him, she scolded him until he left in humiliation. My heart pounded like a drum as I clapped silently for her. When she was about to leave, I stepped out, and she dragged me into putting on an act at the communal canteen. But when the play was over, she wanted to draw a clear line between us. No one could push me away like that. I had to make her take responsibility. Who would have thought she'd cheerfully and decisively agree right away? To keep her from regretting it, that very night I sought out the village head, recognized him as my godfather, and begged him to help me go to Emily's family and propose. Like a dream, I married Emily. Waking up every morning to see her in Bailey filled me with a fulfillment I had never known before. 2 months before Emily gave birth, I was injured at work and lay unconscious for a time. While I was out, I had a long dream. In that dream, I didn't marry Emily. She wed Charles instead and quickly had a child. Heartbroken, I gave up, submitting to the arrangement of an old superior who introduced me to a girl from his family, a younger woman who had studied abroad. She didn't want to marry me, and I naturally wouldn't force her. Later, on a mission, I broke a leg. She left me for a former classmate. When I recovered, that superior, out of guilt, arranged for me to take a decent position in City X. I ran into Emily again after Charles's car accident. She had aged a lot. Though she was clearly younger than Charles, she looked at least 10 years older than him. Thinking back, the good life she seemed to live was mostly just rumor. In my dream, before I turned 60, my body was already exhausted, but oddly enough I wandered and still found Emily. That day, she'd found a kitten, a beautiful striped cat, and I liked it, so I followed her home without worry, watching her care for her foster son and for Charles. Charles's temper was awful. Every time I saw him cruel to Emily, I wanted to punch him. What a fool, living in blessings and not knowing it. Later, when Emily grew old and ill, I learned Jacob was not her biological son, but a foster wolf that could never be tamed. As the saying goes, people of different clans naturally think differently. When I came to my senses, news from home told me Emily had given birth. I hurried back despite my not yet healed body. It was then I realized Emily had likely had the same dream I did. Otherwise, why would she have early on asked me to help watch that spy Linda? But catching Linda alone would have been far too easy for Charles. I used my connections to block Charles's career path. Unsurprisingly, in this life his advancement was hopeless. I still hadn't expected him to drown that mixed-blood son and hand himself over to the law. After he was sentenced to death, many people tried to contact Emily. I hadn't wanted her to meet him, but one message from her. "Big brother, today I'll stay by your side, promise me, okay?" Melted my heart. If I had known, I wouldn't have put her into the performing troupe back then. Seeing the look in her eyes, how could I have resisted? Watching her shine on stage, though, made me proud. I wanted to shout to everyone, "Look, she's my wife." Later she gave me a daughter. Lively, clever, mischievous, just like her mother. What I loved most as a child was watching Emily lead our little boy and girl playing with the cat on the balcony. Sunlight poured through the window and bathed them in a soft, angelic glow. In those moments I felt utterly fulfilled, with nothing left to regret.